It's close to being live, so we'll be there in a moment. And I'm going to go ahead and resume the other recording. All right. And we are live on YouTube and we are being recorded, so this is good to go. I now call the ANC 1E Transportation and Public Spaces meeting to order at 7:03 p.m. on Wednesday, October 2nd. It's just the three of us right now, so I'm not going to go through as much of the logistical items. So unfortunately, we do not have a quorum tonight, but all of our votes generally on this committee are just advisory for the whole ANC. So if we do take some sort of vote tonight, then it would just be advisory for the ANC anyway. And we'll make sure that this recording gets distributed for folks that want to learn more about the project. In terms of meeting content, just wanted to jump right into your presentation, Kevin. I'd love to hear more about what your plans are for Columbia and go from there.
Yeah, that sounds great. So did I understand right that it's at this point just the three of us on the um stream, but then it'll be made of it. Others can join, residents, members of the public, but otherwise it'll just be folks watching recordings on YouTube.
Yep. And
Okay,
we can make sure to post these recordings, post the slides on our website too.
okay, great. Um, So again, my name is Kevin Harrison. I'm a transportation planner on the bus priority team at DDOT. I've been here about 7 years. I also will note that I live in this area, so I'm very familiar with it, very excited for the project. And this is the very ground floor of the public engagement for this project. This is the first public meeting, and I'll be presenting to ANC's 1A and 1D later in the month, um, and then also doing some canvassing. And so I hope to see uh, many of you out on the street in the future. And so the project we're going to be talking about tonight is what we're referring to as the Columbia Heights Crosstown Bus Priority Study. And so given this is the first meeting, I'll be talking about some of the goals for the project and then also about the bus priority program itself. Um, and then a lot of the primary purpose of this meeting is to talk about what we've learned from our needs assessment. And so that's where we kind of do some data analysis, field observations, spend some time out on the corridor, do background research on other studies that have been done in the area, and then start talking about what we think are the problems that we're going to try to address through this project. Um, and so at this point, we don't have any sort of proposal for what we're aiming to do in this area. We're just talking about what we think are the issues and then want to hear from the public to see how our understanding of the corridor squares with residents' understanding and other stakeholders' experience in the real world. Um, and so then I'll talk through a few of the different items in the bus priority toolbox that are not proposed for these corridors at this time, but that might potentially be employed in the next phase of the project when we start talking about concepts. And so that'll be part of that next steps discussion. And also, one thing to note that given the phase of the project that we're in right now, this is a lot of data analysis and a lot of more kind of technical slides and things. So please bear with me and note that it's just kind of the nature of where we are on the project right now. Um, but to start with, the bus priority program is something that has grown out of long range planning in the District of Columbia. Move DC identified, which is our long range transportation plan, identified many corridors within the district, about 70 miles altogether, where There's heavy transit ridership, and my team's job is to implement projects that will make transit work better on all of those corridors to improve travel time and reliability. And the reason we do this isn't just because we love buses. It's about helping the people who ride those buses so they can spend more time with their loved ones, spend less time waiting for the bus, um, travel and reach more destinations, make their life more convenient. And also, it can help emergency vehicles respond to emergencies. Another element of this is that many of our streets are very congested and they're at capacity in terms of fitting cars. Um, and there are bus priority interventions that we can do that allow for a lot more people to move more freely and more conveniently. And so this is a way that we can get more out of our transportation system and provide affordability and convenience for residents. And so some of the main goals of this project are most notably to reduce bus travel time and improve reliability. We're focused on the bus priority element of this project. Another major part of it is evaluating the 14th Street bus priority project that was completed in 2020. Work was done in that project in the first year of the pandemic, and it was difficult to evaluate for a long time because travel patterns had changed, and it was really hard to know what was going to be happening in the future in terms of travel patterns. But now that traffic volumes have kind of stabilized and returned to previous levels, we want to get further into evaluating that project and see how it's working. Um, and the other thing I didn't even note this is the limits for the project are so we're talking about 14th Street and then also Irving Street. From on the west end, Columbia Road, where buses start to make this connection over to Irving Street via Harvard Street and Mount Pleasant Street. And so we want to make sure that we cover that with this project as well. And then the limits for Columbia Road, and then on the east side, it's to Park Place, so right where the road starts to open up, going towards the hospitals in Brookland. Um, and then Columbia Road from Warder Street to 16th Street. Um, and so the other part of this project, as with all of our projects, is to identify further opportunities to advance other goals of Move DC, which, as I mentioned, is our long-range transportation plan. So that would be safety, mobility, and provide more enjoyable spaces. And some of the foundational planning that goes into this project, we're not starting from scratch. Others have done work on this. Is the bus priority plan, which I mentioned before, which identifies the kind of projects and prioritizes the projects for my team, where bus priority interventions are needed the most across the district. So we're building on that. And then also Move DC, which identifies roadways in the district where different modes have different priorities. So particularly relevant to Irving, Columbia, and 14th Street are the transit priority network, of course, and the bike priority network and the freight priority network. So making sure that we take elements of that plan into account as we work on these streets. Then also the Crosstown Multimodal Transportation Study, which was completed in 2016. They did a lot of extensive outreach to community members, and it was really focused on this Columbia Heights to Brookland connections, looking at, what would be the appropriate kind of high level priorities for the different corridors, primarily east west through Columbia Heights and Parkview. And so that's consistent generally with Move DC, making Irving and Columbia kind of the transit corridors. And then another project that's actually happening right now or and wrapping up soon is the Office of Planning is doing a Columbia Heights and Mount Pleasant public life and vending study. And so their focus is kind of around some of the enjoyable spaces, part of Move DC, and thinking about how to make the public realm in Columbia Heights and Mount Pleasant more welcoming and more enjoyable. So that's going to be something else that we're mindful of as we work on this project and some of the recommendations that are coming out of that study. Um, so getting more into the weeds about Irving and Columbia, the graph on the right is somewhat complicated looking, but the the main thing is that the street is generally 30 feet wide. Both streets are about 30 feet wide, all the way through both of the corridors. The only exception is Irving Street between 14th Street and 16th Street, where it was reconfigured as part of the redevelopment of that DC USA property. And there it narrows a little bit down to just two travel lanes with no parking, and then widens out slightly where it meets 14th Street to allow right turn lane, left turn lane, and a center through lane. Parking is restricted during the daytime on one side of the street, generally speaking, east of 14th. That restriction flips on street sweeping days, which makes things a little bit complicated. And then on Irving Street, east of Georgia Avenue, parking was converted to full time. So the daytime restriction was eliminated in 2023. And then west of 14th, that it's no longer a daytime parking restriction. Columbia Road is PM rush hour restricted, and Irving Street has no time limited parking restrictions. And oh, and then kind of switching speeds to talk a little bit about some of the bus operations in the area. I wanted to talk some about the bus network, the bus speeds through the area, and then also some of the bus stops and bus stop locations. With the network, one of the major things I wanted to just touch on is the bus network redesign that's happening right now, that WMATA is leading, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. It's not a DDOT project, but we're an important partner in that process. And just want to note that this area, there are some changes to the bus network. The H2 and the H4 are kind of the main routes that continue all the way down Irving and Columbia through this corridor. But then there are also segments that have the H8. The 42 and 43 make that jog on Harvard Street up to Mount Pleasant. And then, of course, the circulator, where the service is ending. And so the H2 and H4, so I'll switch over to just a snapshot of the new network. Also note that their network's not finalized, but right now this is what they are proposing to roll out in July of 2025. So the H2 and H4 are going to be consolidated into the C61, which will have about the same headways as it currently does. The H8 will be reconfigured as the D74, and it's actually going to be extended to go from Brookland to Petworth, which it currently does, which the H8 currently does, and then it's going to continue down to DuPont Circle and Farragut Square via Columbia Road. So the H8 is effectively going to just keep going west. It's not going to do the loop through Mount Pleasant anymore. It'll just go straight down Columbia and Irving. The 42 and 43 are going to be consolidated into the D72. And then the circulator service will be replaced by that D74 that I mentioned. That'll provide service along Columbia Road into Columbia Heights. And then also additional service on 14th Street. And again, this is WMATA's plan. There's a URL here to learn more about what they're proposing. And I encourage everybody to stay engaged in that process.
And I'll just do a quick note that Commissioner Brown is joining us now, so she might unmute and say things.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I guess just for Commissioner Brown's note, the overall goal of this discussion is just to help lay out the parameters for what for what DDOT will be studying for the Crosstown Bus Priority project. And Kevin's just going through some of the logistical aspects and just level setting some of the existing bus operations right now. But feel free to ask any questions that you have, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. And I was just gonna, I'm gonna try and move a little bit faster. I'm going very slowly, so my apologies. So I was gonna touch on the ridership. It's generally higher where there's more service, west of 14th Street. And so you can kind of see here the different routes that serve the different segments of the corridors and how correspondingly the number of passengers on board buses tapers off as you move east. It ranges from about 700 to 1,700 passengers. Ridership is at about on the WMATA routes is about 90% of where it was pre-pandemic. In the frequency ranges from less than 4 minutes, so that's around Irving and 14th, there will be a bus every 4 minutes. But farther east on the corridor, it's every 12 minutes or so, where it's just the H2 and H4. And so this is a graphic showing bus speeds in the corridors. So, the north-south here, there's not good labels for the streets. The north-south street in the middle is 14th Street, and then this is 11th Street, where you have the H8 is the next line over, and then Georgia Avenue, which isn't showing bus speeds. It's just yellow because of the functional classification. You'll notice that there's lots of orange, red, and black. Those are where buses are generally going pretty slow. The graph on the top is at AM rush hour, and then the middle one is midday, and then the PM peak. And so as you can see, the most severe delay is generally between 14th Street and 16th Street, where you see a lot of that black, because there's a real pinch point at 14th Street and 16th Street. But there's also a lot of red throughout the corridor at many different times of day. I also wanted to note the slowness of buses making the connection around Rabout Park, making the connection to Mount Pleasant. And then also regarding bus stop locations, so these dots on the map are all the bus stops that serve routes that are on these corridors. So the blue ones are bus stops without a bus shelter, and then the orange ones are bus stops with a bus shelter. And so there's a bus stop about every 750 feet on this corridor. WMATA's bus stop spacing guidelines and the preferred spacing for local bus service is 4 or 5 stops per mile, which works out to about 1,060 to 1,320 feet between bus stops. The other thing I was going to point out is that almost all of the bus stops are on the near side of intersections. So the bus stops before it goes through the intersection as opposed to after, which we would call a far side stop. and near side stops are generally slower, and they also make it impossible for us to use a technology called transit signal priority, which will extend the green time at a traffic signal for a bus if it's running late. The reason it doesn't work is because when a bus is stopped at the intersection serving the stop, it will be giving a false cue to the traffic signal that it's trying to get through the intersection. So it generally doesn't work if the bus stop is on the near side. I was also going to note that there are relatively few bus stop shelters along Irving and Columbia. It's difficult because the sidewalks are relatively narrow, and there's not a whole lot of space for shelters. And then one final thing I was going to note is just that there's limited shade at many of the stops. And I have a graphic showing where the kind of trees are located in the area, and circled in red are some of the areas where there's a particular lack of shade from trees and things. So on Columbia Road, the stretch between Sherman and Georgia, where there's a bus stop on the near side of that Georgia and Columbia Road stop, is an area where there's not much shade due to the narrowness of the sidewalks and the condition of the trees. And then also at Irving and Georgia Avenue. On Columbia, it's particularly acute because the bus stops are on the north side of the street, so the sun really shines down on them. And then 14th Street, there actually are trees through most of that area, but they haven't been able to grow very large. In talking to arborists, it sounds like it's a function of lots of foot traffic and things damaging the trees and making it hard for them to really grow and do well.
And I'll just want to pause you there for just a second. I guess Commissioner Footer, Commissioner Brown, do you have any questions about what's been presented so far?
I would just say, no, I don't have any questions, but I would agree with this analysis that there are definitely less shade at the points that you presented, and less shade from trees, but also shade from the bus shelters. So I would just agree with that analysis.
Yeah, it's something that we heard. So I've been able to participate in a lot of OP's public life study, and it was something we were hearing from a lot of residents, and syncs with my experience, and had complaints about this bus stop at Georgia and Columbia before. So it's been on our radar. And, it's also something that there won't necessarily be a lot we can do about it, I think. But we are aware of it and are going to see if there are any opportunities to make improvements to that.
Yeah, but also just that impacts residents who are traveling east to go to the Brooklyn station on the H2, H3, and H4. And especially in the rough weather months. We usually see residents impacted there, but also folks that are traveling to the hospital centers, particularly folks that are in need of care and who have children.
Yeah. And a big part of our program is trying to move buses more efficiently, and then also just improving the overall rider experience, and that's a big part of it. Kind of ties into our pedestrian safety efforts as well, that it's not directly related to bus speed, but improving the overall experience for people who ride the bus.
The
And I guess
experience, and I would also say safety.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
And I was just going to give a suggestion. I think you should feel free to just give us like some of the highlights on the slides. I think we're relatively aware of some of the challenges and can just like read through some of the slides as you're chatting through, just to help you get through it a little bit faster.
Sounds good. And so I was going to talk now a little bit about traffic operations. This may be a familiar photo of Columbia Road, I believe, approaching Georgia Avenue. So this graphic is very technical. And the orange line is showing how many cars can fit through each one of these intersections. Theoretically, it doesn't take into account lane blockages from double parking and things. And then the blue line is the number of cars that are going through the intersection. And so the thing you'll notice is when the lines are close together is where there tends to be congestion. So in the AM, driving from left to right, Warder is where you might tend to encounter a little bit of a bottleneck on Irving Street in the AM. And then in the PM, it's a very severe bottleneck at 16th Street and 14th Street. And then again at Warder. And noting that reflects the conversion to full-time parking between Georgia and Park. And then on Columbia, where you're going from right to left, you'll run into this pinch point at Georgia Avenue. And then it's a little bit more of an incremental reduction in capacity until 16th Street, which is where there's a very severe pinch point on Columbia Road and very severe congestion. And one thing that we're taking a look at for this project is we haven't been able to do it yet, but actually evaluating the blockage, the lane blockage issue, and understanding how often that's what's happening. And to what extent is this orange line actually much lower, and the capacity is not what it should be theoretically. And these are just screenshots from Google Maps that kind of echo the congestion is most severe between 14th and 16th. And then pivoting to safety, Georgia Avenue and 14th Street are on the high injury corridors in the Vision Zero 2022 update. And correspondingly, the highest crash intersections on Irving and Columbia are at those two streets, along with 16th Street, where there are about 12 to 18 crashes per year, according to police reports. And then at the other intersections, it's about 3 to 7 crashes per year. And then I'll also note that Irving and Park Place Northwest is also a high injury intersection, or was historically. That's over here on the right, where you can kind of see this collection of dots. And that caught my attention, and just thought it was interesting that in 2022, DDOT actually installed these retro reflective backplates on the traffic signals and the little mast arm to make the signal more visible. And that's had a big reduction on crashes. A lot of the severe crashes in particular are right angle crashes, where most commonly it's somebody was distracted and ran a red light. And results in a severe crash when they run into each other at a right angle. And so talking a little bit about what the nature of the crashes that happen on 14th Street, Irving Street, and Columbia Road. This graph on the top shows the percentage of crashes by user type. So the blue bar is 14th Street, north of Irving. So that's from Irving to Newton Street. That's the north end of the 14th Street corridor that we're studying. And then the orange bar is 14th Street south of Irving, so Euclid to Irving. and then Columbia Road in green and Irving Street in blue. And so on 14th Street, on that north end, kind of by DC USA, the most common road user involved in crashes is bicyclists, followed by pedestrians if you move over to the other kind of tall, dark blue bar. Whereas on Columbia and Irving, the person most commonly injured in crashes is the driver on Columbia Road or a passenger in the car on Columbia Road. There are still also a very large percentage of bicyclists and pedestrians injured. Looking at the types of crashes, and so the rear end crashes are very commonly among the most common crashes on a corridor, along with side swipes. And then this category called parked, which is generally involving car pulling into or out of parallel parking. And left turn, cars making turns. Then the right angle crashes, which I mentioned, are particularly common on Irving and Columbia and are also commonly very severe because it's, the T-bone type of crash is very dangerous. Frequently just symptomatic of distracted driving and running a red light. And then also you see that Irving has slightly above the others in terms of side swipes, and that can be reflective of the temporary parking restriction and the tendency to kind of have to weave between the weave around parked cars, and creates opportunities for drivers to make mistakes. And one last thing I was going to note on the crash data is we've been looking at the historical trends over time on 14th Street and noting that there was about a 54% reduction in crashes on 14th Street south of Irving, which is where there is a bus lane. So this orange bar is the part of 14th Street with a bus lane. And and that was installed in 2020. And you can see there was a reduction in the following years of about 54%. And this kind of fits into the element of the project where we're trying to evaluate that 14th Street project. And there will be more to come in the coming weeks about that, because we're also looking at bus speed and lots of other characteristics of that project. So the kind of key takeaways from our perspective on this needs assessment is that congestion is slowing buses most severely between 14th and 16th. The short stop spacing is further slowing down buses. Crash rates have declined greatly on 14th Street. There are opportunities to improve visibility and clarify roadway operations on Irving and Columbia in particular. Unsafe behaviors like distracted and aggressive driving may be contributing to many of these crashes. And lastly, in regards to enjoyable spaces, in some areas, people feel uncomfortable or avoid public spaces due to crowding, noise, and lack of shade. So that was one that I didn't really get into in the previous slides, but it's something that's coming out of the Office of Planning public life and vending study that's particularly focused on Columbia Heights. And I know that you guys are generally a little farther east. And so I was going to move on and just talk about a few of the items in our bus priority toolbox. We've got just a few more slides left.
And
Yeah.
I was just gonna, one thing that I feel like is missing from these slides, and I'm sure you're gonna do this during some of your communication, but I think it's really helpful to emphasize the amount of ridership these buses have and the number of people that get around the area without a personal vehicle. So my recollection from I think it was one of the Northwest boundary studies, that was released in 2022, 75.5% of people in this area commute outside of a personal vehicle. So I think that's good to note. I think it's also helpful to note that I think it's like 40% of households do not have access to a car. So there are a lot of folks that need this type of access, and it's fair to make these, like, to figure out ways to make buses go faster given the number of people that are using them. And I also really like that you're highlighting, like, this isn't just the bus priority project, it's also like a safety project, and that safety does affect people that are in personal vehicles.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I kind of go back and forth on some of the knowing that the buses is serving people like well beyond the neighborhood, and sort of how to incorporate neighborhood data like that is always a decision that we make. So yeah, that's a good suggestion though, and I'll probably incorporate that in future presentations. Um, so in terms of the
And then, yeah, I was just gonna say, for these, I think all of us are probably pretty familiar with, like, just the different toolkit or options in the toolkit. So if you just want to give us, like, some of the highlights for the options that you're considering, I think we probably, like, mostly understand them.
yeah, so there's bus lanes, which you will have seen many places in the city and in the neighborhood. Another item that we does not exist in DC at this point is the busway, where we would fully or partially restrict general through traffic, which is obviously the one of the strongest interventions we can make to, potentially expand the pedestrian realm, and then also move buses more efficiently. And that's something that we'll be looking at for this project potentially. And then, yeah, the bus stop rebalancing, which you may also be familiar with, which is looking at the spacing between bus stops and making it more even. Bus stop relocation, generally moving them to the far side of intersections, and then queue jumps. And stop me if you're not too familiar or have questions, but yeah, I will go through them quickly. Curb extensions to improve visibility at crosswalks, median refuges, do the same, and also simplify a pedestrian's decision by only crossing one direction of traffic at a time. Then also lane shifts, which ensure that drivers are alert and are reducing their speed, to negotiate that. The other thing is, there's a lot of things in the toolbox, but the street is only 30 feet wide. So there's just not room to fit everything. So we have to make decisions about what's the most important. And so, we may not be able to fit parking everywhere. We may not be, so, one way that they're obviously trying to balance these desires to mitigate congestion and provide parking is by having a lane serve both functions. So maybe that daytime parking restriction would be something that could change. Also, access restrictions, not allowing cars in some areas. And then block by block design, thinking about what's most important to have in different places. Generally speaking, the constraints will be around making sure that we can continue to accommodate commercial loading and access, and then also achieve those project goals as outlined in the earlier slides. So the next steps for this project is, this month we're going to be focused on doing the community outreach aspect of the needs assessment. And so going to meet with the area ANCs, other key stakeholders in the corridor that we've identified thus far. We'll also just be walking the corridor, hanging up posters at bus stops and talking to residents. And then in the winter, we'll have or 1 second, I'm going to drink some water.
All good.
Sign I'm talking too much. And then, yeah, present alternatives in the winter and make a selection and start working on design in the spring.
And sorry, is that winter of 2024? It says winter of 2025.
So that's like a few months from now, winter
Oh,
2025. Like, I guess winter starts December 21st. So January, February, that range.
oh, okay. I guess it's just weird because I think of it as like the end of the year, but it's mostly at the beginning of the year. Yeah, okay. It's fair.
And so here's my contact information. We have a project website that we'll be adding more content to over the coming months. And if you fill out the survey there, you can get on the distribution list for any project updates when new materials are posted or there's any news on the project.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I'll let you drink more water while we wait. And I had a question about the busway, but I'm going to let Commissioner Footer go first because I see that he has his hand raised.
Thank you. If you could go back to slide 26 real quick. So for the 30 feet, and this is exactly what we're kind of seeing in the area that impacts 1E, what's the criteria that you guys are going to use in the decision-making process to determine whether a dedicated bike lane is the piece that you want to use in your arsenal versus some of the other things in the toolbox?
So generally speaking, the Columbia and Irving are not, for the most part, particularly in the eastern end, are not part of the bike priority network. In the Move DC long range transportation plan. So I would not expect a bike lane. I think that parallel streets have been identified in long range planning efforts. Of course, we want every street to be safe for bikes to be able to reach final destinations and things like that. So I think we will be mindful of ensuring that speeds are moderated through the corridor, which improves bike safety and safety for everybody. But generally, we'll, I think, be more focused on bus priority measures specifically, and that's, I think, the direction we would tend to be going in right now.
Yeah, I'm so sorry if I said bike. I meant bus. So if it's a 2-lane one-way street, and there's a lot of issues with being able to get through particular lights and all that kind of stuff, what is the criteria for being able to weigh if it's worth having a dedicated bus lane and having one non-bus lane?
Yeah, I think it's balancing the benefit to bus riders against the potential delay resulting from a reduction in the number of travel lanes. So we would probably do a more in-depth analysis of how travel time will change for people driving and weigh that against the potential benefit to bus riders. So it's not always like a purely, that makes it sound like a highly quantitative analysis where it's just measuring one person's time against somebody else's. But I think that there will be public engagement. We want to hear from riders and from our leadership and from you all and from the public and understand what the appetite is for something like that. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Totally. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Commissioner Jacobson, I'll give back to you.
Again, thanks for the question, Commissioner Footer. I see Commissioner Brown raise her hand.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. So the Crosstown project is something that I'm familiar with. I was engaged in it from the inception of the project, pretty much when the initial community engagement processes and surveying was done. I think it was back in like 2015, 2014, 2015, when we looked at a variety of options across the Crosstown service area. So one question that I have for you, because I worked with DDOT in addition to Councilmember Nadeau's office and the mayor's office and with other stakeholders to install some short-term safety measures, traffic safety measures through a traffic safety assessment that this ANC passed when it was ANC 1A. And so you'll see that there is an additional travel lane, additional parking lane that was developed as a result of that. So there's no RPP restrictions for the travel lane that's to the south side of Irving Street in particular. So I'm hoping to, for the purpose of the engagement of this committee, that we will revisit some of the design options that DDOT presented as a result of the findings that came out from the community engagement survey. And really that was work that was done and resources that were invested. And I hope that the community's input that was provided during that time gets to be considered and that we revisit those designs as you're engaging the community. And then the second thing that I propose to you as you're thinking about engagement with the community, because we have, since COVID, community meetings have looked differently. But one of the things that I found worked successfully with the Kenyon Street bus lane project was pop-ups. There were community pop-ups that DDOT did throughout the Kenyon Street area. And as we were talking about different design options and educating the community about what was happening and to gather more information from the residents that were going to be directly impacted, that was a really productive process beyond online surveying, because there's a lot of elderly folks that live along the corridor, both Irving and Columbia. So I would just propose that to you. And then the last thing is that with the McMillan redevelopment project, they did a transportation study that considered ridership from Columbia Heights Metro to the hospital centers. And I would just propose that the study for Crosstown, that those findings are coordinated with the transportation study that was developed for the McMillan, because as I'm looking at the timelines and with the delays that have been made because of this project, as a result of this project, that we consider that there's a private bus service that is that the Washington hospital centers and other hospital centers are paying for to get workers from the metro to the hospital centers, but also the additional hospital centers that will be happening at the McMillan, that is considered within your ridership study. So that's my final comment and question.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Kind of working backwards about the shuttle ridership. I have been trying to engage with the hospitals a little bit and understand some of the operating dynamics of their shuttles. But yeah, I mean, there's very high ridership on those shuttles, so that's a very good point.
Yeah. And it'll change with the expansion at the McMillan. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, so I didn't real so as part of the McMillan expansion that they're going to be off adding some space for clinics and things
Yes,
um
yes,
in
yep.
support of the hospital. Okay. That's
It's
good
to
to know. I
build the
wasn't fully aware of that.
capacity. Yeah, it's to build the capacity of the hospital center. So, but a study was done. So I would work internally to find out, where that study is, and so you can look to that data. It was already done, and
Yeah.
the look ahead as a result of the development of the hospital centers side, which is the last phase of the development of the McMillan project.
Okay. Yeah, I'll check into that. And then there was also a study done like 12 years ago or so that focused on the shuttles and things that I've been able to review. But I mean, that's obviously pretty outdated at this point. And I'm not sure if you were here when I kind of talked about some of the foundational planning, but that crosstown multimodal study, I was at DDOT when it was finishing up. I was not personally
Mhm.
involved, but I know it was a major. There was a lot of community outreach that happened, and people spent a lot of time giving feedback and attending meetings and workshops and things. So definitely don't want to throw that out.
Good. Yeah, there's just some design options that were influenced by the community that I would love to revisit through this committee.
Great. Sounds good. And yeah, maybe I can follow up with you at some point and get more specific about some of the design recommendations that you were thinking about.
Good. And I would propose the pop-up idea during, I know community engagement you said will happen in the winter time, but in the springtime, if there's an opportunity to do pop-ups, that was a great opportunity for residents to be inclusive of residents who are not, online.
Yeah, I work with Aaron Goldbeck, who worked on the Kenyon cycle track project. So I'll touch base with him and get some more information on how he set those up.
Great. We love Aaron.
Me too.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. I guess, Mr. Harrison, what questions do you have for us that we didn't already help you answer? Or what feedback are you looking for from us?
So I would only ask that people get online and fill out the survey if you guys can connect with people through your channels. The big thing at this point, I think, is we'd like to kind of start growing our contact list and make sure that not everybody's going to be interested in providing kind of more open-ended feedback on safety concerns and things like that in the corridor, which is what we're looking for right now, is more open-ended feedback. But we do want to make sure that when we start proposing alternatives where people will have something to respond to and where there will be stronger interest, we have a good contact list and can count on being able to get a good amount of feedback and good response. Um and then also, yeah, just you don't have to do it now, but if you have ideas or thoughts or anything like that, this is the ground floor for the project. So don't hesitate to reach, let me know right now, or if you want to talk in the future or send me an email or anything like that. I welcome any feedback, any ideas, any thoughts.
Commissioner Brown, I vaguely recall that when he passed a resolution with some of those recommendations. I think we could just resend that. Rashid or Commissioner Brown, is that right? It's been a while.
When we were in 1A.
I think 1E passed one too, because you had recommendations that were from a 1A resolution. We wanted to re-up those requests.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so we can try to find which resolution that was and resend it to you.
Yeah.
So I believe I have a resolution from 1E, and I hope I'm not mixing this up, but I believe it was in regards to the parking regulations on Columbia Road and considering making it full-time parking on Columbia east of Georgia, similar to what's on Irving.
I actually have that resolution. We passed it in February. It's
thank you.
resolution 5 from our February meeting. If you'd like, I can share my screen real quick if you want to go through it.
I'm happy to. I can stop sharing.
Make sure that I.
Oh, I found it now.
Do you have the signed one? Because I just have a draft.
I do have a signed one. I can share it quick.
Awesome.
Okay. So we reference a resolution from May of 2023, actually, which if I open this link, should take me to that. Yeah, so we passed this one in February, which talks about some of our support for, I think, the TSA that Commissioner Brown is talking about.
Right.
And then this is the one from May of last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to separate the TSI request from the crosstown, the recommendations that we supported for crosstown, because the Columbia Heights, the Columbia Road recommendations are a short-term solution, to the long-term project coming up because it was just so delayed. So if we do have a design in place and have a better sense of the timeline, that might not be needed. It's just like what comes first and what makes sense.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah, it sounds like construction won't happen until 2026 for this bus project at the earliest, but I also suspect that other things won't happen before 2026, given how quickly other portions of DDOT might move. No offense to Mr. Harrison.
Agreed.
And you don't have to comment.
Yeah, and we got a update from Mignon, and crosstown may come first. Yep.
So yeah, I'll make sure that you have these two, Mr. Harrison, but we'll probably want to pass another resolution sometime this winter just to give you more updated feedback on how we're feeling about things. Do you think that's fair, Commissioner Brown? Sorry.
Yep,
I was just gonna
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say I have this one, the
okay.
1E 2023-0501. I don't have the second one that you mentioned though.
Got it. Yeah, I can get it quick.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to drop this link in the chat and you should be able to access it.
All right. Got it.
But I mean, this right now is very broad strokes, and it was more of a DDOT, can you please get moving on this project that we've been wanting for a while? I don't know that it says too much, but if you're looking for some support from the community on any aspect, here's at least we're broadly supportive of this resolution, and I'm sure we'll pass another.
Okay, great. No, thanks for sharing this.
Yeah, this is coming from the NOI that was released for Columbia Road that was further along, more in the 1D area, Browns Morgan. Or sorry, 1C, I guess. That's 1C because it was out in Oregon.
Yeah, okay. Actually, I led that project. So you probably sent this to me, so my apologies.
It's totally fine. You probably get a lot of these. Cool. Commissioners, any other questions? All right, Mr. Harrison, any other questions for us?
No, but thank you so much for your time, and look forward to working with you all in the coming months and years on this project.
Yeah, thank you for your time and all your work on this. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to better future on Columbia Road.
Great, thanks. Have a good night.
You too. And then I guess for the rest of the meeting, there isn't too much. I just wanted to note that the bus priority project for Georgia Avenue is in its next phase. So if you want to give feedback, there is a website to give feedback on, and I can grab that and drop a link in the chat. And we can also post it on, well, I guess all of you have that link. So I will just make sure that link is posted on our ANC website somewhere. And then we communicate it out on our next email update. Any other thoughts or questions from you two? All right.
Nope. I'm
well,
good.
thank you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and hope you have a good rest of your night.
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.